A lot to talk about this morning, and we're starting with former presidential candidate and Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke. Thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be with you, and though we can't be together in person, it's nice to see you all through a screen.
It's nice to see you, too. And Congressman, what do you think of the pick? Is it what you expected?
You know, I didn't know what to expect. There were so many extraordinary contenders, from Susan Rice to Karen Bass to Governor Whitmer to Elizabeth Warren. But I think Kamala Harris is the right choice. And as you may know, through our organization, Powered by People, we've been calling Texas voters over the last couple of months. We've made more than 2.5 million phone calls. And we did a big phone bank last night, made 185,000 phone calls. And I made those calls, my volunteers made those calls. The feedback that we got on Kamala was very positive. I think she's going to generate even more excitement up and down the ticket, which is good for Joe Biden and his chances to win the 38 electoral college votes in Texas. But then it's also excellent for these state house candidates. You know, I think about Elisa Simmons in Tarrant County, for example, who have a chance to form a Democratic majority in the state house of Texas for the first time in 20 years. So a lot of energy, a lot of excitement. I think that's going to end up expanding the electorate and improving Democrats' performance in Texas.
So, Beto, Texas is a big state. What specifically do you think Harris brings to the ticket that will help Democrats here in Texas?
You know, first, there's the historical nature of her campaign. We all know, at least those of us in the Democratic Party, that the success of our party has largely been led and driven by Black women. And yet Black women have often not been reflected in the positions of power and public trust through the Democratic Party. So to have a Black woman, an historical first, as a nominee for vice president is electrifying, and not just to Black Texans, although there are more registered Black voters in Texas than there are in any other state, Gromer. So that's a significant thing to think about in, as you mentioned, a very large state. But it's also generating electricity and energy beyond the demographics. I think, you know, Joe Biden is a steady hand on the tiller. He represents civility and compassion and empathy that have been sorely missing from this last administration. All of those are wonderful pluses. Kamala brings a level of excitement and energy and enthusiasm. She's extraordinarily charismatic. Generates a lot of buzz along the trail. And we would love to see her campaign throughout Texas, where I know that she would not only help Joe Biden, she'd help some of those down ballot candidates, including those who are running for the state house as well.
Now, right now, polls show President Trump and former Vice President Biden neck and neck in Texas. What do they really have to do here to try and flip the state?
I think this is Joe Biden's to lose. You saw in 2018, a midterm year that typically favors Republican turnout over Democratic turnout. We got within 2.5 points of Ted Cruz. And though we didn't win, we did see Colin Allred win his race, a Democrat defeating a long-serving Republican in North Texas and Southeast Texas. Lizzie Panel Fletcher did the same thing. 12 new state house reps, all Democrats defeating Republicans. And in Harris County, 17 African-American women elected to judicial positions. That is indicative of the energy and the excitement and the expansion of the electorate. Now we're in a presidential election cycle, which tends to boost Democratic voter turnout. You have the horrible job that Donald Trump has done really throughout his administration, but in particular in the response to COVID, where more than 165,000 of our fellow Americans have died. Greg Abbott doing just as bad a job here in Texas. In other words, if you continue that Democratic voter surge and you meet that with the very poor performance of those in elected office who are Republicans right now, you not only have Democrats, but you have independents, and you have quite a number of disaffected Republicans. Our job is to reach out to them and bring them in. And that's why we're calling literally every likely voter in the state of Texas over the next 2.5 months before Election Day to make sure that we have the biggest turnout Texas has ever seen. That's how Joe Biden wins. And Texas, wouldn't it be wonderful if Texas delivered it for him with these 38 electoral college votes?
So, Beto, as you know, for both parties, you know, just set the presidential election aside, the biggest prize is probably the Texas House. Where is the Powered by People initiative at in terms of your effort there in flipping the House to Democrats?
We are literally calling every likely Democratic voter in every one of the 150 state House districts. As you know, Democrats are only 9 seats down from commanding a majority for the first time in 20 years. And as you all probably also know, Texas has recently ranked 50th in voter turnout, not because we love democracy less than other states, but because of the racial gerrymandering, the voter ID laws, the voter suppression tactics employed by the Republican majority. With Democrats having a seat at the table, and after this census, 3 new congressional districts being drawn into the state, they can bring voters in, especially those black and brown voters that have long been excluded. So 9 seats down, and guess what? I won more votes than Ted Cruz did in 9 of those districts that we have to pick up. So not only can we do this, you could almost argue we have done this before. And when you add to that the extraordinary candidates that we have, I mentioned Elisa Simmons, you've got Brandy Chambers, Joanna Katnack, Joe Drago, Elizabeth Beck. They're just extraordinary men and a lot of women of color who are running right now. I think that energy and that excitement is going to extend to performance on the ballot, even though our government is forcing many of us to vote in person in the midst of the deadliest pandemic of the last 102 years. I think you saw in the primary voting turnout, in the primary runoff voting turnout, that the electorate is ready to turn out, even though we have very tough conditions right now. So that leaves me very optimistic and very hopeful for a positive performance on the 3rd of November.
Congressman, in the short time we have left, you're familiar with running a Senate campaign in Texas. What does MJ Hager have to do?
She's got her work cut out for her. She had to contend with a runoff election from an extraordinary candidate in Royce, which leaves her precious little time to build the volunteer base and raise the money necessary. But John Cornyn is uniquely vulnerable. He is joined at the hip with Donald Trump. He's his greatest enabler in the United States Senate. I think if MJ Hager can get the point across that John Cornyn is a Trump senator and not a senator for the people of Texas, she has a great shot of winning this race. But she's got to get that message out to everyone in every one of the 254 counties of Texas.
All right, just quickly, Beto, do you have a major speaking role at this week's Democratic National Convention?
Not a major one. I'm going to join a roundtable of other runner-up candidates who are contending for the nomination, and I'll be joined by my fellow Texan, Julian Castro. But Gromer, I think the spirit of your question is, does the DNC and the National Democratic Party get how important Texas is? The short answer is no. They're not going to ride to our rescue. There's no cavalry coming to help us at the end of the day. Texans have to win Texas. But that's the way it's always been, and I'm great with that. And I think we're going to win, and we're going to surprise the Democratic Party nationally, and we're going to surprise this country.
Congressman Beto O'Rourke, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you both.